Cái mic đâu, gắn vào đây.
Today I would like to consider sharing about our research study from in the topic of listening the faculty that affected in the developing country, especially in Thailand case study. First of all, to clarify for our study, the device system that we need to is some kind of the on-site system that we see with domestic baseball of the household worker. So for the background, why we need to study on the user need factor that might be affect to the FSM service because the share of the share of the because like in the Thailand is not we cannot consider only for the transformation and what are the because of generation for the household that we made to serve for the customers. So this is a picture that show about what are the shares of the because of generation in Thailand. So for this study, we mainly is mainly focusing on the first part of the chains is mainly on what are the factors from the user and also the device system that may affect the frequency and needs for the people like any service. So the methodology firstly we should we select the 6 provinces in Thailand in the regions in Thailand because all the regions have geographic aspect and also the user behavior and problem. And then we select 3 cities for each province collect the information by interviewing with the household, with the customer, and also collecting by observation in the device system at the household level, and then we analyze the information to figure out what is the main factors that affect to the because like every service that need to be concerned because the timing is because of the management. And this is the overall purpose of this study that we collect the information like for general information, number of people, the behavior of users for using the toilet and type of system that we see the because like for the household, and then we link with the requirement of the FSM3 service. And for the result of the general information that we found that most of the household in Thailand, most of in the household consists of 3 to 6 persons in the household, and for each person they mostly use the toilet about 3 to 4 times per day. Then this can be calculated for the because like generation for babies. And then we have for each household they generate the because like in different because it's depends on the toilet type. We can classify that to the toilet system and water toilet system. Then how different between the toilet system and water system is the difference is the role that is for each town uses of the toilet activity. And for the investigation, we also observe determine the role that they use the water for the toilet activity that going to the system. It's about 20 liters per capita per day for the toilet system and 25 liters per capita per day for the system. And about the information on the on-site sanitation system, for control, it will check the system that can be valid for one row of the shape or two rows of the shape. And in some areas of the real estate and village, they use the commercial estate or actual project or septic tank. And when we think about how to manage the pre-customer management for the disposal, because they use most of the shape system, so the thing about the pre-customer is already placed into the groundwater, so they not think about to try to commit the system to the system or the purpose zero system. And for them reversion, who are service provider of the free customer, and most in Thailand, the local authority is concerned for the free customer and service, but anyway, some they have a high demand of the free customer and service, so they have another option for like private sector to serve this service as well. And when we look for not all the household or customer that use the because like in this service, then you can calculate more than half of the population, about 66% of the household they have used the because of the service. But when we think how frequently of the APs we need for maintain the proper performance of the system is mostly 60%, 65% of the household they have to annually emptying the system to retain the effective performance of the treatment of the because then we would like to know what are the reasons that they need for the because and for most of them the first priority that they use the open service is to tap of the system, and also when they have been facing with the problem like talking or master for the system, they also call for the FSM3. But anyway, some households they have another option or another solution to overcome the problem that will be using this slide. And from this slide, even the food tanks or basket, the solution for the customer is already set and ready for our service. But the common problem is like problem lack the trash or solid waste that we throw it away to the system. So the top important need to consider about that for planning the because like management. And when we try to pick up how the system affected to the business management. And we found as the Thailand uses a lot of the shape system, and they need quite high for the because of emptying service. And also it can be confirmed that for the shape we also need the annual emptying this like the system. And then not only the product that we have to concern, but also another other factor that we need to concern about, like for the geographic, like dark water level, and also the behavior, like using the active microorganisms in the system, or so chemical reagents for cleaning the toilet. And this can represent the critical factor that we need to consider is is about the groundwater level. If the high groundwater level decreases quite often because like everything. And also, but if they apply the effective rainfall mechanism, it can be extend the time for the business units. And also, for the conclusion, as I said, because like everything is very research, the customer when they have the three main reasons that the full tanks, coffee and last meal, and for the FSM panel, to serve the customers, we need to think about the geographical aspect and also the calendar of the customer.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Stefan Weider from Water, Germany. One question, the additives which you mentioned, EM, that's standing for more specifically?
Effective rainfall mechanism.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? If that's not the case, then we'll move to the second presentation. Corey Russell is a... Oh, sorry, there was one question back here.
One question. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Ousmane Sow. I come from Senegal. I have also two questions. One for the profitability of the private sector. I think that in China, Faecal is managing more than 95% for the government. In this case, what is the profitability for the private sector? It's very important to know this. The second question is, what is the quality of service? To compare private sector service and public sector service.
So you would like to how the practice of the local?
Yeah, he's asking what is the options for the private sector to intervene in the sector if 95% of the services in Thailand are provided by public?
So in Thailand, like some city, they have both the local authority provider and the private sector. But the thing is, the difference is the service, the private sector can come quite quickly compared to the local authority.
Okay, so we'll continue with Corey Russell. Corey Russell is a scholar, a PhD scholar at Stanford University in California. He's also a co-founder of the NGO Resource Sanitation, focusing on solutions for sanitation in slum areas. Corey.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about the impacts of container-based sanitation and household toilet collection service in Cap-Haitian Haiti. So to begin with, we're going to be talking about specifically dense urban slums or informal settlements, and this is about where over 700 million people are living today, and by 2030 it's projected that there'll be about 2 billion people living in these sorts of situations. And due to the informal nature and the land tenure issues around these areas, we find that governments are unwilling or unable often to extend services such as pipe water and sanitation into these regions. Additionally, it's very difficult to get in with other sorts of traditional approaches because of the lack of roads and access. And as we saw yesterday mentioned in the keynote address, Dean Spears has pointed out the strong correlation between population density, open defecation, and how that correlates with cognitive and physical stunting. So this is a major issue in these areas. So to deal with this, typically what we have is open defecation or flying toilets. And these are suboptimal, but they're the cheapest option. So traditionally what we do is we advise that we should put in pit latrines. But pit latrines in these areas are very difficult, one, because you can't desludge them, so you have manual desludging, which ends up in empty lots and in canals, and is basically de facto open defecation. Especially in low-lying areas, flooding results in that just being spread around the community. Additionally, you have the problem that these can be very expensive. And if you have land tenure issues, you're not going to be willing to invest in a pit latrine if you're about to get kicked out or you have to move. So another option is public toilets. However, public toilets have a lot of management issues. And as my colleague Sebastian Tillmans pointed out yesterday, at night usage falls significantly. And as a result, you have open defecation and flying toilets at night. So you're not capturing the full waste with public toilets. And an emerging issue that is finally getting some visibility is the risk of sexual assault while traveling to public toilets, especially at night. So what we wanted to do was expand the menu of sanitation options in these locations with container-based sanitation. I'm going to refer to that as CBS from now on. The idea is that you have a small portable container-based toilet which people can put in their homes. They sign up for a low monthly fee and they get the toilet in their home. And then a collector comes around twice a week, collects the seals and collects the container in there and places a new container. Those containers are taken to the outskirts of the community. They can be put on a truck and then taken to a processing facility. In Haiti specifically, Soil is operating a composting facility. Then you can sell that compost and create a second revenue stream. And I would like to note that Soil, who was our collaborator throughout this, is continuing, even after the research is finished, they're continuing with this service and have more than doubled it. They've grown the service since we finished this research. So what we did was we set this up in sort of a controlled treatment randomized trial. So we had two communities at the heart of Cap-Haïtien. The first is Shada, and Shada is an informal settlement. Soil manages 3 public toilets here, and these are really nice public toilets. They have a manager, they're clean, they're regularly attended, they have long hours, and more importantly, they're free. So this is about the best situation you can have as far as competition from a public toilet. Additionally, we randomly selected the households within this informal settlement to be in the 2 cohorts. The treatment cohort, which would receive the sanitation service, and the comparison cohort, which would not. We did that from GPS data from a previous census of the area that Soil had done. The second community, Aviacion, we selected because we knew that there would be kind of a spillover effect. We would be, by the nature of the dense area there, the comparison cohort in group 1 would see this surge, and it would affect their attitudes and how they perceive their own situation. And we wanted to capture that. But we also wanted to capture what the absence of this would look like. So that's why we had a geographically distinct comparison cohort. The differences between these 2 communities were slight, but the main one is that Aviacion was formally recognized by the government. However, development in that area was very unformalized. Additionally, the community toilets or public toilets in that area were community managed, which means they were not as in good a condition as the ones within Shada. And we did a systematic randomization of that area, taking every 3rd household for a survey. The similarities were that both are about sea level, both flooded during the research, and continue to flood on a regular basis. No roads, no sewer, and no piped water. And what we did as far as research was we went in and we interviewed each of the households at baseline. This was in October of 2012. We distributed the toilets and ran the service for 3 months until February 2013, and then did an inline survey. So the research questions that we were trying to get at, and the ones that I'm going to be presenting today, were 1, what is really the change that we see within treatment households as far as sanitation practices, perceptions, and attitudes in comparison to households that are not receiving this service. And second, we wanted to know would a CBS toilet result in increased fecal contamination within household drinking water? Because this is a new sanitation kind of technology that we're putting within someone's house. We want to make sure that we're not causing some sort of new risk of contamination within the household. And so that's what we were aiming with that. So we spent about a year of iterative design working with Cap-Haïtien residents to come up with this design, which is a urine diverting dry household toilet. And the urine goes into the front into either a container or to a soak wicket, and in the back, after each defecation, dry cover material is applied. In this case, it was sugar cane bagasse and crushed peanut shells. The key with this is that you notice the white veneer and the Western style toilet seat. These were very important aspects of the design because the reason that people choose to upgrade their sanitation facilities is typically not for health reasons. It's for convenience and it's for aspirational reasons. And so making it as similar to a flush toilet, which is kind of the gold standard in people's minds, was very key in triggering that kind of aspirational aspect. So this was the toilet that each household within the treatment cohort received. Additionally, they received training on how to use it properly and general hygiene training as well. Finally, they were, for the 3 months of the research, they were given a free 3-month trial, and then they were given a choice at the end of whether or not, and this was made clear up front, the choice at the end, if you were unsatisfied with it, you could return the toilet and no cost to you and go your way. Or if you wanted to continue, you needed to start paying a monthly fee of $5 per month. So, we asked people, and you'll notice on each of these bar graphs, the left is the baseline survey, the right is the inline survey. So you have your treatment, your comparison 1, and your comparison 2. And we asked about satisfaction at baseline and inline. And as you can see in the treatment, we had an increase from 32% at baseline all the way to 87% at inline. And we did not see a real great change in the comparison groups. Likewise, we asked about a lot of different attitudes: pride, shame, respect, dignity, these sorts of questions. Specifically, I'm going to talk about shame because I think this is very important, and it's a very hot topic when you talk about CLTS, community-led toilet sanitation, these sorts of things. Shame and dignity and these sorts of things can be very powerful motivators for investment in sanitation. And what you'll notice here is that from baseline to inline, we saw people reporting that they felt ashamed by their sanitation situation drop from 53% to 6%. Likewise, when you look at the comparison group, this is the group that is seeing this happening in the community. We saw people reporting that they felt ashamed by their sanitation situation increase from 46 to 65%. So there's definitely an activation happening within the community. Let me be very clear, we did nothing as far as activation goes. We didn't spread any sort of information about this being a better system or anything. This was purely just observation. And that's all great, but does that actually result in any sort of demand? Stated demand is often very, a very fluffy number. So at the end of the survey, we asked, would you be willing to pay $5 a month for this service? And in our treatment cohort, 77% stated that they were willing to pay that. And it was similar in the other 2 cohorts as well. So then we went back 3 months after payment had begun and looked at who was actually paying. And 71% of the original households were actually paying. And there was over 80% on-time payment rate at that point. To put that into context, that's about 2.9% of their reported average monthly expenditures. And to get even more granular, they're spending more on cell phone credit every month than they would be on this system. So finally, we also found that there was no significant increase in E. coli contamination for stored drinking water using IDEX sampling methodology. We have the 3 different levels down here, and basically the lightest shade is your acceptable drinking water. The 2 darker shades are pretty much unacceptable. And what we were looking for specifically was, in the treatment, do we see contamination of those 2 darker shades going up at inline? Because if that goes up, we know that's the one thing we changed, and so we would probably introduce something new. And what we see is that it decreased. Now, it decreased across all 3 cohorts, so there's probably some sort of seasonal effect going on here. But what we don't see is an increase in proportion of the other households that did not have sanitation. So, to wrap up, these findings suggest that CVS services appear to elicit demand in areas where traditional options are not creating demand. Second, we didn't see in this context any reason to believe that there was any great risk from this. And lastly, CVS systems could address many of the financial, technical, and political challenges that are faced within the urban slums. To finish up, I would like to say that these are 2 shameless plugs. First off, this information, and Sebastian summaries from this study are both going to be published in Environment and Urbanization. So if you want more detail, very granular detail, this will be coming out in the April issue and the September issue.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. We have a question here. Come on. Thank you.
Hey, this is Maren from Borda, Germany. I have a question about the service model, because we see that there are a lot of toilets and they're not maintained after some time. So what would be your model around having those toilets serviced?
The actual toilets in the households, you mean? So the way that it was working was that if there was, the households were responsible for cleaning them, and they typically, we took pictures and looked at how well they were being maintained over that time period, and they're typically maintained really well. When things were broken, that can be worked into the service model. If there's repairs that happen as part of the, because in essence, we're looking at it as you're not owning the toilet, it's almost like a rental toilet in a sense, so it's part of the service. So is that answer your question? No.
Okay, there's a question here. Gentlemen.
I'm Faecal from UNICEF Bangladesh Country Affairs. Thank you for the presentation. Basically, two questions. One is, how do you offer the container at the first place? Is it free or you sell it? Number one. Number two is, it must need heavily community workers going 2 days in a week to replace the container. It may be possible for a small scale, but when it is very huge, say you target a community of maybe, I don't know, 30,000 people, then all these containers and changing the containers twice in a week needs huge workers. So who is managing it? It's NGO or the government? And how do you see when you go for a scale? Thank you.
Excellent. The first question, in this system, they get the toilet up front. They don't pay a cost for it, but they're not assuming ownership of it. So it's in their home, they're taking care of it and that sort of thing. But if you discontinue the service, then the toilet is taken back. So it's factored into the monthly cost that it basically takes itself off over a long-term period. As far as long-term, scaling, there's a number of different organizations that are doing this sort of thing. Clean Team in Ghana, X-Runner in Peru, Sanitation. Sanergy is a different take on container-based. But we're seeing rates of getting up into 600 households and beyond. This one specifically is right around the 300 household level. And that is a big question, is what are the logistics around moving to larger scale. But I think those are overcomable things that can be done. And I think there's examples of containers moving around in large scale. The Dabawalas in India is an example of containers moving around, say, in thousands, if not, tens of thousands.
Okay, thank you. We have the last question.
Thank you. I am totally from Water Aid in Pakistan. My question is how the element of bad smell is addressed in this whole system. And the other thing is how the operational side of the collection and where do you dump the excreta after collection from the household? Thank you.
Okay, I'll address the second. I didn't quite catch the first part, but the excreta that's collected is taken outside the community to a designated treatment facility, and soil is composting that, and then with that compost, they're able to sell that for a second revenue stream. So it's being processed, treated, and then so it's the full cycle.
Okay, sorry we can't take any more questions because we're really behind schedule. If you have any questions, you can talk with Gordon after. Next up is SuSanA. She's the Knowledge Management Director of CBD.
Okay, good morning everyone. I will be presenting a study that we have conducted based on our ongoing project in Bangalore, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This project is talking about the sanitation services for decentralized sanitation infrastructure and how operation and maintenance is an essential component of it and what needs to be done to improve that. So this study talks here about the perception and preferences of the end users, the customers who are working or who are benefiting from the services, sanitation services. So the study is being conducted with BODA and CDD together, and I thank my co-author Sriram Iyer from the Indian Rural Management Institute from Anand, Gujarat. So this study is based on the rationale that out of the urban households which are connected to toilets, around 45% of them are connected either to septic tanks or to pits. And therefore, desludging becomes one of the main services required for by the users. And therefore, we studied the perception and preferences of people with respect to the desludging services. The preference of people and their perception is based on various factors, and for that we first try to understand what is the perception of the different end users for desludging. The second objective that we wanted to assess was what is the preference analysis of the, okay, I can't get to the factors now. The preference analysis of various factors that we defined in the study, and we assess them using an uninformed method, uninformed approach, and an informed approach, and which gave us the answers for willingness to pay by the users. So these were the three steps that we followed for the study. The study area that we selected was where we could get access to different sectors of end users and where desludging was one of the main services required. So the study area is Hanoi. It is a satellite town of Bangalore based in South India. And this small town has got around 4,400 households with a population of around 17,000 people. Here there is no proper waste treatment system as of now. They are thinking of putting up a sewage treatment plant and providing sewer network to the entire town, but the work has just started, so it might take another 5-10 years for the work to get completed and for the sewage treatment plant to work effectively. Here there were also the multiple end users were available, so right from individual households to institutions to factories and industries. Jigani is an industrial town, and what you can see here, the purple parts, they are the institutional septic tanks or pits, and the yellow ones are the individual households or apartments that we can see in the town. The methodology adopted was a non-proportionate quota sampling. As you can see from the different end user groups, why we chose non-proportionate quota sampling was because the criteria that we set was that at least the end users had emptied their septic tanks or the pits at least once. So that's why we did not get equal number of people from the different end user groups. After identifying the different households or institutions, we looked at the different factors for perception and preference analysis of the desludging services. And then we did the ranking of these identified factors so that we could understand the preferences of the end user groups and their perceptions. And as is done in market research, we use conjoint analysis, which would give us more clear analysis of what is the perception or the preference of the people for the sanitation service and how much are they willing to pay for the improvement of the service. Okay, the factors that were used for analysis. Timeliness, that means how quickly the service provider responds to the request for desludging. The work efficiency, that is how well the treatment analysis or the desludging service is provided. Is it clean? Is there spillage? Does the service require supervision, or can it be done without supervision? Then the price worthiness, so how do the people think that the service is at a good price, or is it too expensive? Then we looked at hygiene factors, so when the desludging is done, is there a problem of insects, or is there bad odor around the septic tanks or pits? And also the work safety, both from the workers or the service provider's safety point of view, and also where the sludge is being disposed or the septage is being disposed. So these were the factors that we studied, and they were ranked according to the preference and perception of the people. Okay, so the findings, now if we look at the end users of individual households and apartments, we find that with the perception, with regard to timeliness, the response time for apartments was quite good, that is almost like within 24 hours or sometimes between 24 hours to 48 hours, whereas for individual households, the response time was much longer, that is usually around 2 days or sometimes even longer than that. And one of the reasons for this could be that apartments have contracts with these service providers, whereas the individual households don't have contracts. So their perception was that within 2 days, we don't get a service for individual households, whereas apartments say that within 2 days, we do get a response from the service provider. The work efficiency, the quality of desludging service is quite good. Both the groups said that the quality of service is good. Price worthiness, both the groups have rated that the price is on the higher side, and this is the service is provided by private service providers and not by the government, because the government says that it's too far for them to reach this place. Hygiene, from the hygiene perspective, the tanks, when they are full, as SuSanA also said in her presentation, they smell when the tanks are full, and also they cause bad odor and insect problems at that time. None of the end users are actually concerned about where the sludge is being disposed. So they're not bothered about that, though they do think about the workers' safety, but they're not bothered about where the sludge is being disposed. From the preference analysis, the end users from the apartments and the individual households, they prefer for a good quality service, so they want a good quality service and timely response. That is a priority for them. And the safety of workers is a priority, and they are even willing to pay a little bit for it, but not too much. So within $1 or $2, they are willing to pay for the safety of the workers, but they are not bothered about the disposal of the septage, where it is being disposed, and the main reason for that is the cost that is associated with it. So the transportation cost and also the treatment cost. So when there is no associated cost, the ranking shows that the quality and timeliness are preferred. And when there is an associated cost, then the safety concerns become more, have a higher ranking because people are not willing to pay for it. For the industries, we see that they are quite happy with the timeliness, that is quick response within 24 hours, and that's because a contract is available. They have efficient and decent job for the efficiency, and they say that the price is quite okay for the service that is being provided. It's not expensive. They don't have any problems with the smell or insects, and they are concerned about the safety of the workers and also where the sludge is being disposed. And when the cost was also added to it, the ranking remains the same, so they want the safety to be on the higher side, and also the quality and timely response is important to the industry. So for them, the ranking did not change with the willingness to pay or the cost aspect added to it. Next slide. We also did a study of the hospital, college and school, and here we find that there's a similar trend. People want quality, people want timely response, but the schools are affected by the price and they would prefer that the quality time is and timely response is on a higher ranking, whereas they're not able to pay and not willing to pay for treatment of the septage. Next slide. So as a conclusion, we can say that if we have to improve the services for desludging, a timely response, next slide, timely response can be improved. Quality of work can be improved by training. That's around $2 for training, and that will help in improving the service, and people are willing to pay for that. For the service, they feel that it is overpriced, and the high price of disposal and the lack of awareness is resulting in the unwillingness to pay for the higher price. So they're not too willing to pay for that. Householders, though price conscious, they are concerned about the workers and they are willing to pay for the provision of the safety equipments, but it should not be more than $2 per desludging activity. Industries are satisfied with the service and they are happy to pay for safety as well as the timely and quality response. They are not price sensitive and they are willing to pay for the safe disposal and treatment of septage also. With the increment of price, next slide. With a minimal increment of price, the service is acceptable, and the end user, to the end user, if it provides for improved services and the safety of workers. So from this we can see that the end users are willing to pay for the safety of workers, but the cost of desludging and the disposal point and the treatment is still a concern. For industries, it is acceptable, whereas for the individual households or apartments, that's still a concern. So this was the study outcome from our intervention in Faecal.
Okay, thanks, Susmita.
Hi, thank you. Anthony Kilbride from Haiti. I think you mentioned the schools were unwilling to pay the price for desludging. Can you maybe explain why that was and what kind of work you're doing to convince the schools individually of the importance of desludging and also perhaps at a national level the importance of desludging?
For the schools, what we found out that the price associated or the cost associated with the treatment aspect, which is around $9 to $10 for transportation and treatment, they are not able to pay for that, and they say that of course we are concerned about the health and hygiene, but as the sludge is not being disposed in the school campus or near the school campus, it actually doesn't affect us. But in general, we are concerned about the health, and if we do get the price then or the cost support for it, then we would be willing to go for it. And school sanitation in general at the national level also, it's of a great concern, and many programs have started now to look at school sanitation, and which just does not mean the awareness or the hygiene education, but also providing appropriate toilets and treatment to the waste that is being generated from these toilets.
Okay, we have a question back there.
Namaskar, this is Sachin from India. I want to ask one question because this presentation is regarding perception of the people, the communities. Traditionally in India, the perception of the people towards this kind of sanitation things is that they treat these people who do these works as untouchables traditionally, and they look upon it as with contempt. So what was the analysis? Are the people only paying to those who are paying services? Are they themselves concerned about these logic activities, these sanitation activities? What is their perception about that thing? I want to know about this.
The perception of the sanitation workers or the people who are accessing these services?
Perception of the people who are accessing these services. Are they looking towards these services as something which is to be given to others, which is not their business? They are holy, and those people who are doing it, they are less holier than these people. What was the question?
Well, that's definitely, you have answered the question yourself. It is still an unholy activity, and the users or the end users here who are accessing the service, they do consider themselves more holier. But what we did understand from this study was that they are willing to provide more, willing to pay for the safety of these workers, because they feel that if these workers have access to these safety equipments, personal safety equipments, they will not suffer. So at least that's a different or change in the perception of the end users, and I hope that this continues and it can be more adopted as just a service and not like, okay, they are a different kind of people and I'm a different kind of people.
I would add one small thing to this, ma'am. I would say that only that service can be successful as outsourced, which the people themselves will be willing to do but are not able to do because of paucity of time or something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next session. Next is Mohammed Wasim Bashir Bahar. And Bashir will be looking at the social cultural barriers around FSM in Pakistan.
Hi everybody, let me say good afternoon to each other. Today the topic I am going to discuss with you is about socio-cultural barrier in the Faecal sludge management in Pakistan. So it was a local youth-based initiative to indicate what are the social and cultural barriers in Faecal sludge management in Pakistan. So first of all, I would like to thank my peers who supported me during my study and conducted my research as a pilot project. So what about introduction of this study? This study was conducted in this district Faisalabad, Tanjawala, which have almost 20 hamlets under this jurisdiction area, while the community which was selected for this study belonged to a rural community, very backward and to river Wadi, and almost have 39,000 populations. This study was actually conducted with the prime objective of how to get the better understanding of sanitation approaches and practices being practiced in rural communities of Pakistan, and to implement the safety measure of Faecal sludge management. And the third one, the last one, was unlike the socio-cultural barrier, which is faced by local communities as well. So, the methodology which was used for conducting this study, almost 13 hamlets out of the 20 hamlet which is jurisdiction area of the Tehsil Tanjawala was selected as a target populations, and the structured questionnaires, focus group discussion sessions and person observation. This tool was used as a data collection tools, while 1,300 households was selected as a sample with using random sampling techniques, while 130 focus group discussion session was conducted with 50% male and female ratio, and 10 focus group discussion session was conducted in each hamlet, while in that time 5 for men and 5 for women. While the religious leaders also interviewed each hamlet of the conducting the target study area, and government officials were also conducted interview about the provision and reception of sanitation services in the local area. While about key findings, almost 95% of the local population belong to Muslim religions, and most of them was agriculture, and they belong to very low socio-cultural and socio-economic education status. There was it was very strange for me being a student and being a researcher that the local community of rural area was strongly against towards construction with the confinement of the households. They usually reported that the religious doctrine is totally against this situations and limited knowledge for practice about hygiene at Faecal management. This is a pie chart which is extracted from my data, is clearly showing that what are the sanitation practices being used at local community. Almost 42% of local community was using open defecations in fields, and almost 30% was drop on store, just drop and collected in separate tank. And almost 11% was using flush and forget, while 18% was about flush and discharge system of sanitations. Which you can say almost 50%, near to 50% people are still doing open defecation in Pakistan. Rural communities are my target area. The local community is usually demonstrated and reported that it's like to talk about Faecal sludge management in Pakistan. And it was very interesting for me that a lot of people say, oh, what you are saying, guys, what you are saying. We usually enjoy the open defecation when we use open at field and open sky and birds are singing sweet songs, cool breezes blowing. What you are saying? Do you want to snatch our that budget time? Oh, that was a very critical time for me as was being a researcher and younger person. So, people found very reluctant to talk about the Faecal sludge management with the local communities. No interest. It was also strange for me. And when I asked them if anyone subsidize you, anyone provide you the sanitation toilets, construction, how would you please accept it? The response was no. No, we don't want, because we want to use open defecation and enjoy the open sky. So, the next one was the bad smell and health hazards at local communities. This is a socio-cultural barrier pie charts which extracted from my data, and you can see almost 40% of local communities representative demonstrate that the religious doctrine of the Pakistani country does not allow them to even touch the feces and urine because it's very rigidly founded there. And here, remaining almost 20% was the same that this is not existed in our culture and tradition actually. And we were never allowed to each other. I mean, even we were not allowed to our local community to adopt such a facility at local community. About 14% say yes, we want, but we have not enough information. We have enough information how to manage it. And 11% say, so sorry, we have not technological information about these situations. And almost 16% say this is a bad, disgusting things. You are telling bad smell situations and fecal situation as well. So the next stage of my this parent product was advocacy, because Faecal sludge management is not going to be practiced in Pakistan, and I was a student at Kamsat University and I engaged the local governments, meet them again and again and influence them and mobilize them to join me and support me to conduct this research in this local area. The government watchdog and youth feces task force group was established at local community because I was also a son and I talked to local young people, please join me because I want to indicate this critical situation in Pakistan, and I am very thankful to my peers as well. So feces was used as organic fertilizer and black water was accumulated, and the area which is almost 1 hectare which was provided by local feeders to be for my conducted study. All the black water which is confinement of feces and urine was collected, and the control field was irrigated with that black water and fishes. Then it was very a kind of a sporting point for me. I asked, okay, you people don't want to use at the household just to sport. They say, but I say, you people just go to this area and do open defecation in night time. They say, we will try. And a lot more people support me to defecate at night and this area. While at the same place, inorganic fertilizer and fresh water was used, and you can say how much nutrients the fishes and urine have. This is a picture glance which is showing. This is a production lens. This is a production ponds, transformation, how we transport the black water to fields, our limited fields. This land is covered with the non-permeable plastic sheet so that all the nutrients and all the chemicals not penetrate in the groundwater and not disturb the groundwater bodies as well. This is accumulations. You can see the scenario, and this is on field. This study was conducted on the maize productions. This is height of maize productions where Faecal segment was used. This is the final productions. Traditional cultivation almost same. Further uses. Now at this moment the black water fishes same is used at the sugarcane fields. So community acknowledgement and Faecal segment. Community acknowledge that it's very good. It's time saving, money saving and help. But we will never use the Faecal segment because we are not adopted and this is they even say we would prefer to die. Even use the productions from the Faecal segment. Will just assume very disgusting to me as being a researcher and not talk about Faecal segment practice. And the conclusion, Faecal segment is quite profitable business and ecologically sound, having very small and big impact philosophy, but difficult to apply universally around the world. And local community of Pakistan totally against this use of Faecal segment, the socio-economic culture, religious and policy constraint in Pakistan as well. And it's very difficult to adopt everywhere in Muslim countries. So I know it's red card, but just 1 minute, please. Fundamental challenges. So this is a fundamental challenge in Pakistan being faced by our communities, religious affiliations, socio-economic continuous disaster stress, poor education, environmental hazards, lack of political will, instability and poor policies, and class, gender and women issues, institutional capacity and health paradigm. The recommendations is the education institution, youth and media the joint venture to mobilize the community capacity building, risk management as well, and political enforcement, decentralized sanitation system could be provided, ecologically respected, and it can be used for resource recovery as a fertilizer and biogas. And thank you so much for being with me. Any question, please? Yes.
Thank you for the presentation and the opportunity for me to ask. I have 2 questions. My name is Ali from Indonesia. First question is on the religious doctrines and religious religion that you say people will get and prohibit them from building or construct the toilet at home. I wonder if you happen to actually ask them whether they could recite something from their religious, or saying like, okay, that person, like an imam or something in the region, saying that it's something that they think something that religiously based, verse or something that prohibits them from constructing toilet. Because I think if you say it's a bit confusing for me if you say religious doctrines versus perceptions or traditions. I would say it's a religious doctrine if they can recite something like very clearly specific,
with that
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
So why in Pakistan is that so pervasive?
Yeah.
Religious issues pervasive.
Is it religious documents or just perceptions or tradition? That's my first question. The second question is
Let me respond for one place. First of all, thank you so much to indicate that religious in Pakistan. Being I am also a Muslim and Pakistani as well. So it's no matter because I was a researcher that religions in Muslim countries, it's very clearly indicate that the thesis and doing it is not touchable things. Because even it's a very smart sport, touch in your clothes, you cannot offer your prayers. So, because of construction of the private household level, people usually, because they were not well educated. If they were well educated, they were never saying what you are saying to construct a private household level. Because this is also a service student, they have privacy system. But our religions, I think so, have a specific doctrine to touch and deal with physics and human as well.
Does that answer your question?
Is it clear?
not really. Okay, anyway, I can talk to you after this, but the second question I'll move up. I think there's a link between when you're saying, at first they were Faecal, and then suddenly we move up to building a task force within the community. How do you do this? What are you doing there?
I'm not understanding. What you please speak loudly?
So at first you say there's a Faecal in the community, and then you say on the next slide you formed a task force within the community. So I wonder what were you doing so that the task force is formed?
How did that change take place?
How did you change the community's perception and values?
So this was a pilot project of me there at Pakistan, and this is not existing now at this stage. I just engaged my friends, my local friends, because I was a student. I belong to our local community as well. I request them please join me and help me to conduct this study because I was student from that university. This was very interesting for me to conduct a figure study management study in Pakistan. So the local governments also support me to influence the local community for defecating in the restricted landscape. They just support me to influence the people's defecation. The youth task force helped me to collect and confinement the black water and take it to my study area.
And then we had a question here.
Thank you, Wasif Babur, for the presentation. I'm Shafiqul from Bangladesh. Two questions. One is understanding the situation of Pakistan and particularly where you work. You approached and started developing a group called Women Wash Group. It looks like a very daring approach where men are not very acceptable of talking about feces or fetal sludge management. And in that circumstances, forming a group with the women, what kind of challenge you are facing, number one. Number two is FSM in agriculture field. There should also be a sensitivity of coming feces as a fertilizer to the agricultural field and people taking those food, how they accept it, using fetal sludge in the agricultural field. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was what I was expecting from you people. Thank you so much. The first question is women wash group. I had already responded to my friend from Indonesia that this women wash group was developed just to influence the local community to defecate in the confinement, which is 1 hectare land of my study area at night time. And this was not a huge number of groups. This was just one group consisted of more than, I think so, 5 to 6 women in each hamlet. And these women were very, I think so, valuable to my peers group. So they just helped me okay, if you want to conduct this study, we will help you. Government just helped me to mobilize the local communities, children's, women's, men's to defecate if you want in the evening, in the night. While about the productions and is used, the second question of you, these crops was not used locally. It is very clearly mentioned. The production was not used at local community. Part of the production was sell out in market. So even you can imagine the rural community did not use the grass of that particular area. This is showing the cultures and traditions from the public perspective of the program.
Okay, we have a last question here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going from water. So just an amendment of the question of the topic that how do you confirm the safety of those plants or crops because you are using the liquid portion directly to the agriculture. So you have answered a little bit, but the thing is there are two approaches. Like before you apply the liquid part directly to the agriculture field, you must confirm that the production of the crop will be very much safe for the consumer. And the other part is you can apply it directly to the agriculture, but when the crops will grow, you must confirm the safe consumption of the crop, like maize and sugarcane. So did you confirm the safety before or after activation of the waste product?
What about the matter of safety? Thank you so much. It was very critical to me as well because I was a student. But all the young men and women which were working with me as a group, all was using safety gear as well. The proper gloves, proper something, and and the land which was constructed for the accumulation of the black water and take it to my study area was also covered with the non-permeable plastic sheet. One thing. The next one is about the productions and risk about its quality. I think so you were concerning. Yes, to retain it. It is. I am very sorry because I belong to social sciences. My concern was just to indicate the social cultural barrier, and I had not conduct medical research and nurses about the cost of misproductions. I just indicate what are the problems of Pakistani rural community are facing in the fishes and black water as well. So, as per your question to analyze its laboratory or its quality assurance, I did not check it yet.
Okay, so health issues were not considered. Okay, the next presentation. Next presentation, Nazim Tahir from Bangladesh. Please.
Good afternoon. This is Nazim from Gender and Water Alliance Bangladesh, and I'm going to present a presentation which is regarding management and practices of wash facilities in the low-income community, especially slum and informal settlement in Bangladesh. So this is the outline of my presentation that I will say briefly about the fecal sludge management in Bangladesh. Then the definition of sanitation safety plan and its 7 steps according to the guideline of WHO. And present scenario of the informal settlement and some real field examples which is related to sanitation safety plan. Actually, first 3 steps we are focusing here. It has 7 steps and later on some observations. So these facts actually taken from the recent research funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, and they mentioned that about 42% of urban inhabitants in Bangladesh they have toilet or septic tank, and only 18% in the capital means Dhaka they are under formal sewage connection. Those who have treatment plant, and this sludge actually mostly emptied manually, that means by human being. And untreated sludge are mostly dumped in the open water bodies, rivers or canals or strong sewage line. Regarding the definition of the sanitation safety plan, actually in 2004, who developed a guideline on drinking water quality, which is called Water Safety Plan for safe use of water from source to mouth. And based on that, in 2006, who developed another guideline for safe use of wastewater, actually to prevent fresh water from pollution or prevent wastewater from contaminating fresh water. And later on in 2009, in Stockholm World Water Week, the technical committee actually recommended the term Sanitation Safety Plan. And it has 7 steps, and we are focusing here on first three steps, and the example will be given in terms of waste generation, mostly in Bangladesh, in low-income community. Waste generation is developed from pit toilet, or CMT means community managed toilet. And transportation of this waste, sometimes it is go to the direct sewage line, in which this pipeline is available, and when it is not available, it is directed to, it goes to septic tank and then sewage line. And it is collected manually or sometimes with the help of vehicle tank. And the next 4 steps, that means treatment, on-site or off-site treatment, sometimes decentralized treatment. We have very few in our small towns. And valorization means development of wastewater for irrigation and other purposes, disposal and reuse. These are mostly relevant to well-off community or public department. It is actually qualitative survey and qualitative research or field study where we observe the performance of the given wash facilities and how people are practicing it in their life and maintaining the operation and maintenance. And what are the challenges, actually barriers to practice this sanitation chain in the field and scope of work for the next project. So these are some actual scenario in the field, that is regular operation and maintenance and desludging. We have mechanism and we have some studies about the regular operation and maintenance that we have when we enter any community. We have we formed a group, community-based organization, and then we capacitate them by giving training, and also there are some funding mechanism to collect fund for operation and maintenance. But scenario is something different, but we have such mechanism in the field. And regarding dislodging also, we have some design period and mechanism that after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, depends on the design, you have to dislodge the septic tank. Then second is cleanliness and available water. Sometimes people say that if there is no running water, that toilet will not be clean. And when there is water is available, that time it is much easier to clean the toilet. But both scenarios is found in the field. That sometimes we have found the site which didn't have running water, but the toilet is clean. And sometimes we found that there are running water, but then also it is not clean. And leadership and way forward. Leadership is very important if you want to make something way forward after handing over the project or after phase out. So leadership is also important. But in the field, we have found that when there is no strong leadership or motivation, that time means after certain period, the development actually is stopped. And lip service, here by lip service I want to say that what we are saying actually we are not doing appropriately or properly. This is the communication in the field that donor, they have direct linkage with international NGO, and this INGO implement the program in the field with the help of implementing agency and partner NGOs. And these implementing agencies have direct linkage with low income community, that means slum people. But the linkage is missing, that LIC, they don't have direct linkage with the service providers or government organizations. We have very good example in our country regarding water services, that this informal settlement, they can apply directly to the government services for water connection. But for toilet, we still don't have such mechanism or system where they can apply directly for such services. This is one of the example of the field which is phased out in 2010 and constructed in 2007. So in the field we found that it requires very huge operation and maintenance, but they are very reluctant. Though we had the system, we had the fund, we had a mechanism in the field, we have capacity build-up program, but it is not maintaining and it is not reflected in the field. And it is situated in such narrow space where habitat can enter and dislodging it would be very difficult. So it was in our site selection strategy that when you are selecting the field, it should be in such place where you can dislodge it very easily. But then also it is not practiced. And from the beginning to till date, it is not dislodged. And initially there were so-called, now it is out of order, and septic tank is also not functioning well. So the intention of presenting this, that we are already doing a lot, we have very good document and very good mechanism, but we need very small thrust to make it more polished and to make it successful. This is another interesting example. When we visited this site, the people are asking the same implementing agency for another new toilet or for operation and maintenance. But they don't think themselves that how we can do it, or except that NGOs, we can ask to the government or other service providers as a citizen of Bangladesh for basic water or sanitation rights. But they actually don't have that information and they don't think of that. They only know the NGOs who came to them at the first time, but they are very temporary, NGOs there for very temporary time period, and they work for them for certain period, but there is some lack of information there, that maybe that information was not communicated well enough, that after this handing over or phase out, what to ask or claim your demand. This is another example when we actually constructed such toilets in the site. After certain periods, the landlord developed another story overhead. So which is actually very much risky regarding engineering or technology, and also it makes the access very congested. But as it is very easy, they get very nice concrete structure or brick structure, then they found it very easy to make additional story overhead or the room nearby, because they have already one partition wall. This is another example of the slum where we want to make or give any facilities. Most of the time they prefer the place where the construction is very difficult and it is very low land, because they want to preserve the wasteland for house, to develop house and for tenant. They are not interested to give very good place for the toilet construction. So it also makes very challenges to get place for the toilet. This is regarding changing behavior, that the waste pump, they reshaped it. Actually the original shape was it was covered and it has another part. But sometimes maybe there are argument or controversy that if they reshaped it, why you don't prefer or honor their choice. But there should be some linkage with science and the message of community people. Because if community people prefer to reshape this, we can't follow it because it has some science behind it, why the shape is like this. So we need changing behavior and motivation also. This is the scenario of the toilet which has running water, but then also it is unclean. So there are a few observations that for this kind of program we need good motivation. I would like to say motivation rather than mobilization. And after that, capacity builder program with application of knowledge. And then follow-up and strict nurturing program for better operation and maintenance. It is not like that we are giving a capacity builder program like you have to do this way, you have to make the fund, or you have to do operation maintenance this way. But rather than we have to nurture them until or unless they can do it themselves alone. And access to information, where they will get the right information, where they will claim their right after the end of the project. And linking community government organization. And last, the total inclusive sanitation plan. Already we are doing very well in Bangladesh. The open defecation percentage is only 4%. We know the needs and necessity of toilets, but we are stopped in certain points. Now we have to think about the inclusive sanitation plan, which will result to the total sanitation of fecal sludge management later on. And the scope of work for the next time, the development work should not be stopped when when project period is over or donor has been gone, because STEAM it has many things to do, but usually what we do after the donor goes, we just leave the field and we don't go look behind. And most of the time, the local in community, they are not sensitized enough to go away for it and linkage it. And inconsistency between strategy and implementation. That means what is in the document, we are not following it properly in the field. And it is very important to reflect our findings in the next phase of the project and focus on rehabilitation program also along with new projects.
Hello, Giacomo from Gali from IRC. I was very pleased to see Gender and Water Alliance presenting this, but I did not encounter gender dynamics around the fecal sludge management. Do you have any experience? Can you share something?
Thank you so much. Actually, this is the study of the low-income community, which when I used to work for Water Aid, that now I work for Gender and Water Alliance. But also we have such program in our organization where gender comes in differently. That means if I say about technology, we prefer gender-friendly technology. And sometimes there are some NGOs who make only women wash forum, that only women group, they take care of this operation and maintenance and other programs in the field. By this way, gender is inserted. But it doesn't have any gender dimensions in this, that wasn't my objective, the gender dimensions in this study.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the second last presentation by Margaret Morales from UBC in Vancouver, Canada, looking at how to sanitize on-site building sanitation.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. I'm Margaret. And this work is done in collaboration with Dr. Gunilla Over, who's at the University of British Columbia. And she's with me here. There she is. So sanitizing on-site urban sanitation. What I mean by that is how do we make on-site sanitation in urban context not just acceptable, but desirable? So there's a very high failure rate in on-site urban sanitation. Generally, relatively few projects actually receive any kind of long-term monitoring, perhaps only 5%. But of that 5% we've looked at, there's maybe upwards of 70% that are no longer functioning properly after 5 years. So that's very high. And there are a number of reasons that have been explored for that failure rate. Technological difficulties, economic obstacles, etc. But a key reason is user acceptance. And simply put, people want to be able to flush their toilets and be done with the whole process. As a result, the on-site sanitation solutions offered are often seen as a temporary fix until I get my connection to the centralized sewerage system. A connection to that sewerage system that affords a flush and forget sort of experience. It does an excellent job of immediately separating the user from their excreta. Their relationship with the excreta ends after they leave the bathroom. And that sort of distance from our feces has become part of how we imagine urban life, what it means to live in an urban center. And as a matter of fact, the lack of connection to that system continually underscores this feeling of marginalization in the urban community. We've talked about many times in other sessions this discrepancy in funding. 90% of funding in this sector is going to centralized sewerage systems in contexts where perhaps 90% of the population is only served by on-site systems. And we've been describing that as a remnant of an old engineering paradigm, which saw centralized sewerage as the only answer to sanitation issues. But I wonder if it's a little bit deeper than just an engineering paradigm. It remains in sort of all of our images of urban life, that really being connected to a centralized sewerage system is what it means to live in an urban setting. So moving on from that understanding, we began to ask, is the reason that we have this high failure rate because because we look for practical solutions. We look for the best solution we can think of in the situation, but we rarely continue to ask, what's the desirable solution? And what I mean by that is not, how can we give everybody a flushing toilet connected to the municipal sewage system, but what's behind the desire for that, and can we answer that desire? So, from this, we began to look at a number, and there's a growing number of these examples of people in urban centers who are voluntarily choosing to disconnect from the sewage system. And these are in situations that have 100% sewage coverage, often in cities in the global north. And people are choosing to get off. And so why is it okay in these situations to not be connected to the sewage system, and instead to maybe embrace the proximity to the excreta in management? So here's a summary. I'll give it to you up front. We found essentially there are two ways that these types of projects have succeeded in making proximity to the feces acceptable in an urban circumstance. The first is what I'm calling a technical approach. In this approach, the project seeks to recreate and preserve a sense of distance between the user and the excreta. And since that's not a spatial distance, the feces is managed on site, these projects use alternative tools to create a sense of distance, and it's perhaps a social distance. The other pathway by which these projects have been made acceptable and celebrated in an urban context is a behavioral approach. And these types of projects center and rely on very high user buy-in. And that user buy-in is motivated by something strong enough to make people feel like, let's start a new paradigm with our excreta, and let's change. Maybe we don't need that distance. So I'm going to now talk about two case studies that we've looked at. That one that demonstrates each of these and kind of get a little bit more into what tools those might function off of. So the first case study is the Buick Center. This is a building in downtown Seattle, Washington. Again, that's a context, a city with 100% sewage coverage, and yet this building has chosen not to connect to that system. It's a 6-story commercial space and celebrated as the greenest commercial building in the United States. And it's currently in the process of being certified under the Living Building Challenge, which is a set of green architectural guidelines, in some ways more stringent than even LEED Platinum guidelines. And a part of that Living Building Challenge is that the building it must manage all sewage on site and can have no connection to a centralized system. So in the case of Buellich, they have installed composting toilets. Now this is a picture of the commercial composters in the basement of that building. Essentially, feces and excreta are channeled down to these composters, mixed with some wood chips, and the composting happens right there. So what's the work this technology is doing? We know that composting is a very old technology and it's not expensive. But what's happening here is that this technology makes the process out of sight, out of mind, it reduces the odor, and that creates a sense of distance between the user, who may be at the most 6 stories above the treatment of their excreta. So that's one way in which this building has employed technology to create a sense of distance, not a spatial sense, but a social sense. The other thing this building does is they employ experts. They employ technicians to manage this system. And my guess is those are not underpaid engineers. But that sense of we have an outside person coming to manage this system is another tool that's being used here to create a sense of distance for the users. So the Buellich Center is approaching the sanitation challenge from a technical perspective. It's using experts and technology to create a sense of distance. And the user experience of those toilets, even though the toilets are essentially dry, there's very little water used, the user experience is nearly identical to flush and forget. So now I'm going to take you to the second case study. This is the Gebers Housing Project in Northern Sweden. That's just outside of Stockholm, I believe. And this project could be considered in many ways the polar opposite of the Buellich Center. So this project was formed in 1998. A group of friends and acquaintances came together and said, we want to live a sustainable lifestyle. And part of that vision was managing their own excreta. And to do that, they installed UDVTs, they're in diversion dry toilets, in the building. And in this case, the user is highly involved in the management of those toilets. There are collection bins in the building, in the basement of this building, similar to the Bullitt Center. But each apartment owner is responsible for their bin. They empty it into a communal composting site, and then 2 residents of this housing project manage that composting site. So this project has approached on-site sanitation as a behavioral challenge, and it centers on high user buy-in. And the fact that this community came out of people who themselves came together and said, we want to do this, that's central to how this has been sustainable in the long term. In this case, the motivating factor behind that high user buy-in was this desire for sustainability. And that has propelled and sustained user involvement in the management process. So here's a quick summary. There's the two approaches to on-site sanitation, making it acceptable, well desirable. The technical approach is one. In this case, the user's distance from the excreta is priority. And these projects have implemented tools to get that felt sense of distance. In the case of the Bullitt Center, those tools were the employment of experts and the use of technology to make it out-of-site. But I want to push that a little bit further. I think there are other tools that can be used. That worked, in this case, that worked at the Bullitt Center. But what other tools work in other circumstances to create a felt sense of distance? The Bullitt Center is celebrated as this green achievement, and that is very palatable to West Coast Americans. So it works well in that context. But the idea of creating a sense of felt distance and something that can be celebrated could be translated to other situations if we understand what's palatable to another circumstance. And then the second approach is the behavioral approach. Here, the focus has been high user buy-in to sustain user involvement in the management process. And so sanitation interventions that require user involvement, really they center on user buy-in. And that buy-in from the earliest planning stages. And that's often a big challenge with these kind of interventions. So I will leave you with this slide. I only talked about 2 case studies today, which is very limited, and that's because of our time here. But from the case studies we've reviewed so far, we don't see that there's necessarily a benefit to either of these pathways. The key is to do one very thoroughly, to either truly create a felt sense of distance or to get significant buy-in. And these developments have changed the text a little bit. These are the questions I think we need to ask to push ourselves forward and to figure out how to make either of these approaches applicable to whatever environment we're working in. So either how can we create a sense of social distance in the absence of spatial distance, or how can we identify and encourage a high user buy-in? So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We have a question back here.
Thank you, Margaret. My question is, do you have any questionnaires, or did you get in touch with any of the communities over there? I'm just wondering if we actually get the Swedish building in Seattle and the Seattle building in Sweden, would it actually match? Would they be happy? So that's why I'm asking about the user experience. Do you have any primary data on this?
So part of your question is, have we done surveys, and part is, are the users happy? So we haven't done surveys. This is the beginning part of this study. But I think we see user satisfaction by the fact that these are long-term projects. The Gebers Housing Project has been going since 1998, and the Bullitt Center has been built since 2000, but it is getting so much positive press. being hailed as a great achievement. So I think that's how we're measuring user satisfaction at this stage.
I was just wondering if these 4 places would they be successful again in the other?
Okay.
I'm building in Sweden, would the people in Stockholm accept it? And if we have the Swedish building there, would the Seattle residents accept it? I'm just wondering.
Okay, that's interesting. So I think part of what I'm trying to get at is that in each of these, there was a vision that was palatable and acceptable to that circumstance. An achievement in green architecture in the case of Billotson, or living a sustainable lifestyle in the case of others. I think the key is to identify what works in a particular circumstance. And so I can't quite answer. My sense would be, in this case, yes, it might transfer, but that's sort of, that's not the point. The point is, these projects have found what works well in that context. It's very context specific.
Okay. Any further questions? Yes, back there.
Hi, my name is Cecilia, I'm from Brazil. What I found interesting perhaps is to connect with Corey's presentation that when you attach a service to the container-based sanitation, you are also creating this sense of distance that the users are not handling the waste themselves, but they are having a service attached to it. But when I read this question, how can we create social distance? And then my question would be then, what does create social distance, or this distance that is not spatial? Because what I understood is that it's a high technical solution that would create this distance, or what else would be creating?
Okay, so it's not necessarily high technology that creates the distance. In the composting toilets, that's not a high technology. Composting is an old technology and it's relatively low tech. The work that technology is doing in that context is creating a felt sense of distance. So the user feels that process is removed from them, even though it's really spatially very close. I think I'm answering only part of your question. The other part where you said this refers well to Corey's presentation, I think you're right. The one thing that Corey mentioned that resonated with me was we made these toilets look, they're kind of the porcelain top, and they look like a flushing toilet. And that's another way that creates this sense, creates a sense that you still have that flush and forget system, even when the excreta may remain on site. So that's another way that you can create that a sense. Maybe social is not quite the right word, but it's a user sense of distance, and that's removable from the management process.
Okay, thanks. And last question here.
My name is Chris Abrams. I'm at the World Backwater Sanitation Program in Kenya. While you were talking, I thought I completely agree with the messages, but it's just such a different context from what I and many other people, I think, in the room experience. And so I was going to think, well, that's sort of you can expect Canada, the US, and Sweden to have these sort of issues. It's so far removed from the slums in Nairobi. But it is interesting in Durban, they had the water utility went out specifically to find out what people want, because they had a real problem with people not using toilets or just letting them decay. And they actually found that the critical thing why people wanted a toilet there was to have privacy. That's the priority around the toilet. And so what they started developing, they bought shipping containers and they turned them into public toilets near where informal settlements started evolving. And it's increased the use of the facilities enormously. Especially women like to go in private. I mean, the men sort of do their thing more or less everywhere. But it's advanced enormously. I just wanted to make the comment. So it was a bit puzzled about it. So different from what I thought.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly the sort of thinking I hope that a model like this could get us to. This happens to be in situations with high sanitation coverage and where these kind of projects are financially possible. But I think we need to think about those questions exactly in a variety of contexts, and there will be different motivating factors in those contexts. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. We come to our last presentation. Buddy Garba is a consultant for the WSP in Jakarta. And he will be talking about social media approach to FSM box.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Budi Darmawan, and I am from Jakarta, Indonesia. I work for WSP and also I was from the US. Okay, maybe the time is very limited. Okay, let's talk about the FSM, but in different way from the other presentations. Okay. In Indonesia, especially Jakarta, we have a new phenomenon. Like we have a very basic handphones and package data, and also the internet network is almost everywhere in the country. So cheap that you can buy a handphone only $24 US, and the package is about $4 for 1 gigabyte. And the next thing is what is about the relationship between the FSM and the new phenomenon? It's about the advocacy itself. So we can use the things in the phenomenon with the technology, and we have to advocate like the House of Representatives and also the high level of government officer and community leaders. So what is the social media we are talking about? You can see that in Indonesia there's about 48 million active users on the Facebook and also on the Twitter. Jakarta is ranked number 1 in the world. And also the Indonesian people love to watch the video. Like if you can see that the music video is most liked by 198 million viewers. And what is the agency who like to use this this potential market? Is the Jakarta wastewater company, we call it PD Jaya, and why they use it? Because now the PDPA is handled not only the sewage system but also the on-site system, and they will serve about 2.5 million households in Jakarta area. Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia, and I think we can now see the video. Can we have? Yeah. Sorry, I would like to mention about there's also about the cultural icon in this video, like the music, the background of the music. It is pentamonic traditional, and also about some features of the big doors, and also about the dialect, the way the people talk. This original in bahasa in Indonesian language bahasa, but we translate for you and listen. Thank you.
Did you know most of capital cities in Southeast Asia have been using sewerage system? That's why their cities are clean and beautiful, right? How about the sanitation facilities in our beloved city? It turns out that the coverage of sewerage system in DKI Jakarta is only around 4%. Most of people are still using septic tank or pit-to-tree, which is very close to the water source. Therefore, it causes groundwater pollution. Unfortunately, there are so many people who don't understand that groundwater pollution could causing health problems such as diarrhea. It's also decreasing citizens' productivity. They cannot work because of their illness while they have to provide medication for themselves. They need to earn more money. The government had to spend more budget to overcome those pollution. The pollution also made tourists unwilling to come to Jakarta. That's because the water is very unclean and it smells bad. According to the statement of Jakarta's governor, the domestic waste should be processed through sewerage system, not dumped directly into the ground. That's why the government of Jakarta had released the district's governance policy number 3/2013, which transfers the responsibility of dislodging services from the city sanitation department to PD Paljaya. Have you ever heard of PD Paljaya? PD Paljaya is the local state-owned enterprise of wastewater management in Jakarta. Their mission is to increase citizens' welfare through wastewater management services such as sewerage system, on-site system, and its processing. Most of settlements in Jakarta are still using septic tanks, so the dislodging services is becoming one of the solutions. At this time, the dislodging services is implemented through on-call basis, especially when the toilet is clogged, overflowing, or smelling. This system still has problems, such as inappropriate dumping of dislodged waste. Most of Jakartans still don't understand about good sanitation system. Most of the septic tanks in Jakarta are still not according to SNE standard and linked into the environment, which is the case in most residential areas. In many business districts, there are still developers and owners who don't use on-site system. There is an easy solution to overcome those problems: the scheduled dislodging services. PD Paljaya will do the routinely dislodging services for local citizens, government, and also private sections. The dislodging trucks are modernized and sophisticated, supported by reliable operators and GPS systems to ensure the dislodged waste delivered into processing plant. Don't worry about the payment. The scheduled dislodging services is more affordable because it uses monthly payment system. The regular dislodging services will prioritize the areas which are located outside the current sewerage networks, the area with highly polluted water, and the flooded area. Basically, those areas are still not reached by the local PDAM services, so they have to use groundwater. PD Paljaya will start the regular dislodging services in residential areas and government buildings as a pilot. Who's next? PD Paljaya will cooperate with local banks to make payment system easier. They will also cooperate with local vocational schools to assemble standardized septic tanks. Now, you've known the benefit of regular dislodging. With affordable payment, we would get the benefit of good sanitation services. Our neighborhood would become more healthy, and groundwater is safe from pollution. If we are healthy, we could be more productive to work and earn a living. Clean Jakarta will also attract tourists. Therefore, let's support new sanitation for new Jakarta.
now move to the behind the scene. So this video made by several agencies, the Jakarta Wastewater Company, the WSP, the UOS, and made in the local animation studio. And it take 3 months from the scratch to the final delivery. And the budget is 2,260 US dollars. And in the efforts we have a meeting with 5 times and consist of 4 people of separate agencies. And that video we use for the advocacy of the House as a representative in Indonesia system. If the agency wants to have a budget, they have to present the proposal to the House of Representatives. And also we use the video for the socialization in the community level and in the household. And now we put the video on the YouTube, and you can see it. So far, the impact is the House of Representatives raised the budget from the 32 million US dollar up to 258 million US dollar for 5 months, for 5 years. And at the community level, we have speed up our data collection. Target is 6 months. Now we finish in the 4 months. And for future use, we will have advocacy material on the all level, like to advocate to government officer and others area and even other city. But we will take 1 or 2 iconic cultural iconic from that video to make it more familiar to the public to know about the program. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Maybe one question before we go for lunch. Back there.
Sally Brown from the University of Washington, and that's a terrific video. Congratulations. Are you tracking the number of watches of the video, and how are you trying to maximize exposure or increase the number of hits on YouTube for this?
Yeah, I think now the numbers are quite small, only 17,000 who watch the video. At the time we have government changed the government, so we are not yet full advertising on the YouTube, but we will. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for coming to this session and